International Virtual Conference on the Impact of COVID-19 Pandemic in Legal Field. I'm MD Sajjad Hussain, Lecturer of Law, University of Asia Pacific. So we have two distinguished guests, our panelists today with us. Our panelists are the Farmin Islam, Professor of Law, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh, and our another distinguished professor is Vijay Prasad Jaswal, Lecturer, School of Law, Kathmandu University. There are 4 participants who will present their paper. The first participants are Protasha Ahmed Mim, Department of Law and Human Rights, University of Asia Pacific. Her topic is the rise of violence and inequality against women during the COVID-19 pandemic in Bangladesh and barrier to the legal protection. Second participants, Shahriar Islam Shobon, Department of Law and Human Rights, University of Asia Pacific. His topic is domestic violence against women in rural areas in time of COVID-19 pandemic, Bangladesh in context. The third participants, Faria Zareen Ontora, Department of Law, University of Dhaka, Bangladesh. Her topic is the veil epidemic during natural disaster, upsurge of intimate partner violence on the wake of COVID-19 pandemic. And our last and fourth participants are Arafat Ibnul Bashar, is from Department of Law, University of Chittagong, Bangladesh. And his topic is evaluating the mass release of prisoners during COVID-19 pandemic and other public health emergencies. So this whole session will be moderated by Ms. Nazia Ohab, Assistant Professor, Department of Law and Human Rights, University of Asia Pacific. I again welcome you all and ask her to take over the session. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sajjad, for giving me the floor.
Thank you.
Welcome to the panelists, and also I'd like to welcome the presenter who are going to present their paper. So at first, I am going to introduce Protasha Ahmed Mim. She is also a student of Department of Law and Human Rights, University of the Asia Pacific. And the title of our paper is The Rise of the Violence of the Inequality Against the Women During the COVID-19 Pandemic in Bangladesh and Barrier to the Legal Protection. So, Mim, I'd like to request you to start, please.
I heartily apologize, but Ajan is going on here very close to my house. So can I have
prepare your PowerPoint slide, then you can start. You can take 1 minute, I think, to prepare your slides.
Okay.
We'll start. Thank you.
Am I audible? And can I assure that
You are. We can also see your slide. Thank you.
Okay. First, I would like to thank all the organizers for giving me the opportunity for being here and for giving me the scope to present my paper before the panelists and this conference. I'm Protasha Mim from Department of Law and Human Rights, University of Asia Pacific. The title of my paper is Rise of Violence and Inequality Against Women During COVID-19 Pandemic in Bangladesh and Barriers to Legal Protection. To present this paper, I will be mainly focusing to introduce the title, what is gender-based violence, and how the fact and which factors are facilitating violence against women in Bangladesh, even in the pre-pandemic situation, and emphasizing the factors which are giving rise to the violence against women during COVID-19 pandemic. Some data that has been collected through the human rights NGOs and the reports collected from the secondary sources regarding the violence against women in COVID-19 in Bangladesh, and the systematic barriers of access to justice is in pandemic, which the victims and survivors of the gender-based violence are facing in the pandemic situation will be discussed. As the theme of this conference is the impact of COVID-19 in the legal field, the COVID-19 pandemic is an unpredictable situation that made the whole world to stand still with surprise and sudden fear for a while. Challenges and difficulties increased in every sphere of life, as well as for the pandemic situation, violence against women have already also been increased due to so many factors. Not like that violence against women is a new phenomena or a new topic because which have arisen in the COVID-19 situation, but women had been suffering from violence from time immemorial because of inequality and imbalance of power, as well as subordinate position in the society. Due to COVID-19 situation pandemic in Bangladesh, women have been subjected to violence that has been significantly increased due to so many factors and barriers which have increased because of the COVID-19 situation. Violence is an extreme form of aggression, and gender-based violence is an act or any act which is carried out or committed against any person only because of the sexual orientation of the person. Though gender-based violence have been addressed as a human rights violation internationally, but till 2021, women are being targeted of violence and gendering crime because of the gender-biased mindset of the society. From data of the reports of Aino Shalish Kendro, BRAC, Human Rights Watch, and so many reports reported after the pandemic situation, it has been seen that inequality and violence of different form have been increased during COVID-19 pandemic in Bangladesh. So, before pandemic situation, there were also so many factors which were basically facilitating violence against women in Bangladesh. First, in the pre-pandemic situation, four factors can be basically identified which are triggering the violence against women, or which factors are working behind why the women are targeted to violence. First of all, the cultural factors. Our culture, what we used to see and witness by ourselves, are happening in front of us, are the most effective one for our mindset. Patriarchal attitudes and discrimination in roles, responsibilities, and rights have been practiced in most of the sectors in Bangladesh. The culture of justifying discrimination and violence against women is one of the major factors which is facilitating violence against women in Bangladesh. The legal factors can be said so precisely that so many general laws addresses violence against women, and as well as so many special laws has also been enacted to protect women from violation and gendering crime. Beside the general courts, so many special tribunals has also been made under the special laws. But the real scenario is, though there are so many general special laws to protect women, but they are merely being implemented. And also, cultural factor also affect the legal factors that when any person is getting victim, she is again blamed. Not the perpetrator is blamed by the society, but implementation is very rare in the legal one. That is precisely, there are so many laws, but they are merely being implemented and enforced, and the victims can very rarely get the privilege of the laws. Now, the economic factors is a very major and practical sector that is triggering the violence against women. Financial dependency is one of the most important and major factor facilitating violence against women. It is very common thing that when a person is financially dependent on another person, the dependent person become inferior and she has no way other than to tolerate the violence carried out against her. The political factor can be said that again the gender biased mindset, and women are only to cook and clean the household chores. They should not be in the position of the leader, and because the gender biased mindset of the society is that they have to remain inside the home. That's because they should not come to the leadership position. The factors that are giving rise violence against women during pandemic situation can be identified very clearly. COVID-19 caused 15 million additional cases of violence over the world, mainly increased exposure to perpetrators due to lockdown orders, triggering stressful environment for perpetrators, and reduced support services are the main avenues contributing to more violence. Around 20% violence have been increased during the lockdown since March 2020 to this year. The following factors can be identified which are giving rise and enhancing the rate of gender-based violence against women in Bangladesh. First of all, lockdown has increased exposing the new perpetrators. Women and men are stuck at home due to the COVID-19 situation, as the works have also to be done from the home. For this reason, it is an important reason that the people who generally did not used to commit crime against their intimate partner, they are also being victim by their intimate partners, as it is a reason that they are staying at home more, and that's it is a
student.
Hello.
Requesting everyone to mute the microphone, please. Thank you.
The second one, that is a very important factor in the perspective of Bangladesh, that closure of educational institute causing child marriage even at a higher rate. In Bangladesh, the guardians are rushing for their girls' marriage, especially in rural areas, and child marriage increased because of closure of educational institute. In Bangladesh, especially poor people want their girls to be married, as they are considered as an extra burden when they are staying at home because the schools are closed. Underage girls are at more risk to experience domestic and intimate partner violence, as they have less capacity to resist violence against them. Again, in the health sector, women workers are disproportionately being victims while dealing with violent patients. There are so many health workers so many women health workers who are at greater risk of violence serving on the front lines of the fight against pandemic places. Because of the COVID-19, stress have been increased at home. Women are disproportionately bearing burden of unpaid care work in the home, and additional to their role as formal caretaker. Women are at greater risk of contracting the virus. They are spending to take care of sick family members. Again, women are spending more time online as the works have been focused to home and the work are mainly doing through the internet. Women have to spend more time internet and in different areas. Therefore, as the social media and various sectors where women have to engage themselves for their work purpose or any other purpose, they are subjected to molestation and different kind of harassment through online. Again, financial crisis due to COVID-19 situation and financial dependency has been given rise to the violence against women. That's because so many working women used to work outside of home and they used to income money for their own livelihood. But due to COVID-19 situation, so many women have lost their job and they have become dependent to their intimate partner or their husband or in-laws. It is a reason that financial crisis where two people were earning in a family, one is earning because another one have lost his or her job. So financial crisis and financial dependency have given rise the violence against women. The recent scenario of gender-based violence against women in Bangladesh can be seen that the BRACS 410 human rights and legal aid clinics received more than 25,000 complaints of gender-based violence in Bangladesh in first 10 months of 2020, which has been reported by BRAC in December 2020. According to the survey of Ain o Shalish Kendro, asked, in comparison to last few years, the incidents of sexual harassment, molestation, violence caused for dowry have increased in 2020 for influencing factors of COVID-19 pandemic. More significantly, the number of domestic violence and child marriage is much higher than previous years. Only child marriage have been increased near around 40% in comparison to previous years. Polish Samaj reported a 24% rise of incident of violence against women in Bangladesh in 2020 compared to 2029. As it has been seen from the various data sources, so it has been collected through secondary data. The factors before the pre-pandemic situation and the pandemic situation and the recent scenario has been discussed yet.
I'm sorry, Beam, I am interrupting you. You have 5 minutes to conclude. So can you please summarize your paper by summarizing your findings and concluding remarks?
Sure, ma'am. I am almost there. I have just 2 points left to discuss. Here now, I am saying the barriers to access to justice in the pandemic situation. The factors and the scenario have been given, and now there are so many barriers that has been created in addition to the previous barriers to access to justice for the victims, which have been caused because of the COVID-19 situation. First, the most important thing is that the courts have been closed due to the COVID-19 situation. And in the pandemic situation, so many new victims are so many new victims have been subjected to violence, and they have very less sources to get information how to get legal support. And if they are being subjected to violence, they don't know, and they don't know how to get legal support, and they don't know how to that there are legal aid, and there are legal support for accessible for them. But lack of this information and lack of their communication, they are at limitation of communication. They cannot even report the violence, and they are continuously being barred from access to justice because of the pandemic situation. The last part is recommendation and concluding remarks. That is, as we have already seen, the factors that are giving rise and the barriers that has been created because of the pandemic situation. There are some recommendations that should be enacted to combat and reduce the violence against women carried out against them in Bangladesh. The existing laws and policies should be accordingly implemented, and the access to justice must be both available and accessible. Though there are so many laws that are availing and preventing the violence against women carried out, but they are merely remaining books, but they are not implemented or enforced. The justice system must be accessible for the victims so that they can get justice. Again, systematic barriers like corruption, delaying justice, case backlogs needs to be dealt with sincere government responses. The legal personnel at every stages should be collaborate and support the victims, and social awareness is required to be increased. Individuals and government should be fight against all form of violence neck by neck. That's all from me. I conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much, Mim, for your nice presentation. Welcome, Parmin Islam, ma'am. We are happy to have you with us today. Ma'am, can you listen to me?
Madam, can you hear us? Unmute করতে হবে একটু। আপনি unmute করলে আমাদের শুনতে পারবেন ম্যাডাম। আপনার কথা শুনতে পাচ্ছেন, আপনি muted হয়ে আছেন।
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes,
yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much for having me here. And I just got a little bit of the last participants, the last presenters, few minutes into her talk or discussion. Yes, I got it.
Thank you. Actually, our today's event is divided into three parts. At first, our presenters will present their papers, and then our respected panel discussant will put their comments on the paper they have presented, and after that, we'll have a question answering session. So now, I am going to call another presenter, Mr. Shahriar Islam Shobon. He is also from the Department of Law and Human Rights, the University of Asia Pacific, and his paper is Domestic Violence Against Women in the Rural Areas in the Time of the COVID-19 Pandemic, Bangladesh in Context. Shobon.
Ma'am, assalamu alaikum. Ma'am, am I audible to you, ma'am?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon to everyone. Distinguished guests, kind host, honorable moderator, and respected panelists, all the audience, ladies and gentlemen, and the viewers. This is Shahriar Islam Shobon. I'm the student of University of Asia Pacific. And I'm conducting my Bachelor of Laws degrees from University of Asia Pacific. And my title is Domestic Violence Against Women in Rural Areas in the Time of COVID-19 Pandemic, Bangladesh in Context. So this is a picture. This is a picture which I downloaded from the Manusher Jonno Foundation, the official website of Manusher Jonno Foundation. Well, regarding this issue, I divided my paper based on 4 objectives, research objectives. First one, I tried to review the scenario of domestic violence in Bangladesh during COVID-19 and to analyze the existing laws and the legal systems relating to domestic violence, and I attempt to findings the loopholes of existing laws and the legal systems of Bangladesh relating to domestic violence. And lastly, I will provide the probable solution also. Well, here is my research methodology. This paper is both qualitative and quantitative approach, and I obtained all the required information from primary and secondary sources. And primary sources have been collected from mainly 4 districts: Borishal, Khulna, Bagherhat and Rangpur districts. And for getting all the information, I took help from City Corporation Mayor, Member of Parliament, Borishal 5, Union Parishad Chairman, and Sub-Inspector of at Dumki Thana, Patuakhali, Bangladesh. Well, for conducting my paper, for conducting my research, there are 2 research questions established. First one is, during the COVID-19 conflict, what are the core reasons for domestic violence against rural women? And the second one, in what ways may domestic violence against women be eliminated in Bangladesh? Well, first of all, core reasons behind the domestic violence, and the second one, how I can root out this problem from Bangladesh. Here is the list of my synopsis of this paper. Introduction, conceptual analysis, domestic violence situation in rural area during COVID-19, the reasons for domestic violence in rural areas, existing laws, legal framework, and number 6, inadequate execution of laws, findings, recommendation, and lastly, concluding remarks. So, introduction. Actually, domestic violence is something we are acquainted with, and which means many victims haven't received the support they need. And domestic violence is increasingly seen as human rights and public health issue also. Well, so domestic violence is widespread in Bangladesh, and it is increasing due to the pandemic. To be honest, rural women experience a wide range of attacks, and they are not treated with respect and endure free domestic violence because their education level is so poor, and as a result, they are unaware of their rights and responsibilities. So Bangladesh incorporated an act named Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act 2010, and which is designed to prevent domestic violence, and actually it ensure the right, protect the victims and ensure their rights and responsibilities also, and that's why it's preventive as well as educative also. So during COVID-19 in rural Bangladesh, I will use this paper to investigate the causes of violence against women during a pandemic. And during this period, I will concentrate mainly on women who are mistreated in their homes. And I got this data from Manusher Jonno Foundation and Aino Shalish Kendra and Nari Pokho. 157 people were slain and 64 others were abused by domestic violence in the last 3 months of the country's economic crisis. And what are the reasons? Actually, reasons were for countries' worst crisis. People are losing their jobs, actually, and industries are suffering losses. They haven't enough money for supporting their family and children also, and individuals are spending their days at home and contributing to domestic violence against women. Well, so I already mentioned it in my research methodology slide that my research is both qualitative and quantitative approach, and needed info are obtained from both primary and secondary sources. The secondary sources is obtained from books, papers, journals, website, case laws, etc. Well, it's a major portion of my paper, that domestic violence situation in rural area during COVID-19 situation. According to Manusher Jonno Foundation and Pink Cross organization, they just researched and conducted a survey report, and they found that around 11,000 women suffered various kinds of domestic violence during the lockdown in May. And not only that, victims experienced 179 of them were targeted to attack, basically sexually assaulted, physically assaulted, threatened assault, and death. Even 170 documented cases of child marriage during COVID-19 situation. Well, This is my mainly a primary data. I have collected this data taking interviews from Virtural, Khulna, Bagherhat and Rangpur districts, and I attempt to contact 50 women in order to conduct interviews in order to get some crucial questions. And the questions are did their family lose their jobs during COVID-19 situation or not? Then the second question, whether they have is it true that they are sexually assaulted or not, physically assaulted or not? If their answer is yes, then did they make complaint to their nearest police department or police station? And after getting the information or after getting the complaint, police took some initiatives also. So regarding these issues, I collected this data, and I think according to my data, primary data, I got this around 23% around 23% of women, they got married, early marriage, and 12% women, they are sexually assaulted, and 12% were mentally tortured by their husbands. And more surprisingly, 53% women, they are physically tortured. So here is my figure 1. And my second question to them, that is there whether they have any knowledge about domestic violence related legislation in Bangladesh or not? And they say 35.30% they responded no, and they responded yes, and rest of the person, I mean 64.70% they responded no to this issue. I mean, knowledge about domestic violence related legislation, maximum they don't have enough knowledge about this type of legislation. Well, so I have collected all the data and taking interviews from Borishal, Khulna, Bagherhat and Rangpur districts. And for taking this ratio, I got help from Borishal District Commissioner, Borishal City Corporation Mayor, Member of Parliament, MP, and Sub Inspector SI at Dumki Thana, and Union Parishad Chairman and Union Parishad members also. Well, so according to my survey, 39% of the peoples, they just lost their job during pandemic situation. And I tried to cover around 4 districts and 15 villages, and took interview around 50 women, from 50 women. Well, so major question. The question is the reasons for domestic violence in rural areas in the time of COVID-19 situations. What are the reasons actually? First of all, men's frustration. So that was the first reason, because they lost their job during pandemic and they haven't enough money to support their family and children. It was too hard to continue themselves with themselves, and that's why they are getting frustrated. And men's frustration was the first reason. Then child marriage, and then restrictions on the ability to make a complaint, and last of all, the financial crisis. So already I talk about that, and here is the picture of child marriage. Though Section 5 Child Marriage Restraint Act 2017, it incorporates in Bangladesh, and it's all child marriage is prohibited in Bangladesh. It's true, but for family, for pressure and for economical crisis, for financial crisis, it was too hard to continue with their family, and they thought that daughter or children is a burden for them, and that's why that minor daughter, they got married. Well, and restriction on the ability to make a complaint, and when a woman is intimidated or harassed at home, legal action may be taken. But despite this, a significant proportion of persons are unable to testify regarding abuse in court. And the financial crisis, it's all, I got this data. I got this data from my my primary data analysis, and reasons for domestic violence in rural area during COVID-19. Around 80% plus, they lost their jobs and they're facing financial crisis during pandemic. And yes, 84.6% unemployment rate and severe economic crisis. And when I taken this interview, a fact raised in Patuakhali, Bangladesh, Piara Begum, who is a victim and lives with her husband and with 2 boys, and her husband's loss of work happened when COVID-19 was underway, because he couldn't pay both the family's expenses and the children's educations also. So for protecting women's and ensuring their rights, ensuring their victims' right and responsibilities, Bangladesh incorporates some laws, and the laws are Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act 2010, the Dowry Prohibition Act 2018, Repression Against Women and Children Special Provision Act 1995, the Provision of Operation Against Women and Children Act of 2000, Penal Code 1860, Declaration of the Elimination of Violence Against Women 1993. So Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act 2010. In this, mainly the aims and objectives of this act is victim of domestic violence has been discussed in chapter 4 of this Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act. And another has the right to apply for remedy in any court, and court shall set a date for hearing within 7 working days, mainly for protecting the women and ensuring their rights. This act is incorporated. Well, so Declaration of the Elimination of Violence Against Women in 1993, according to Article 2 of this Act, it just defines the domestic violence definition in 3 segments. First of all, acts of physical, sexual, and physical hostility and physical violence also. And the second portion covered the assault, sexual harassment, harassment at work, educational institution also. And the last and final portion, physical, sexual, and emotional violence regardless of the victim. Well, and Penal Code 1860, there are some sections which covered all the crimes against women, and which is covered by this Penal Code 1860. Dowry Prohibition Act 2018, when I took interview from them, and they said that they are physically tortured or mentally tortured because of they have enough money in their family, and for this reason, only issue was the dowry, because of these issues they are mentally tortured and sexually assaulted also. So we know that dowry is totally unlawful, and the violation is penalized under section 3 and 4 of the Dowry Prohibition Act 2018. And also in 2014, the Honorable Appellate Division of the Supreme Court of Bangladesh upheld the conviction of Abul Bashar Hawladar for demanding dowry marriage and for permitting his wife to do the same. So it's clear that dowry is totally unlawful in Bangladesh. The cruelty to women, deterrent punishment, it includes the kidnapping or abduction of women, human trafficking, rape, and death threats, etc. Well, so inadequate executions of laws and Domestic Violence Prevention Protection Act, Bangladesh, it helped advance efforts to recognize domestic violence as external dowry violence and establish the physical, mental, sexual, and monetary abuse as components of this maltreatment. So here is my portion of my findings of this paper. Mainly the Domestic Violence Prevention and Protection Act 2010. This act does not apply to divorced women, and it makes no mention of the penalty if an offender breaches the law. And another major portion is when it comes to the issue of divorced parents' children, they too are victims. They are not protected by the law. As a result, it is often a double whammy for victims and moms when the children fall on her shoulders after the separation. And mainly the resource scarcity is the lack of collaboration among those involved in keeping the survivor from receiving aid. Another findings is there is still a financial shortage, and shortage must be put in place and laws in this matter. And last of all, during the COVID-19 crisis in rural area, law is enforcing determined that no specific mechanisms to oversee law enforcement had been in place. Well, this is my recommendation slides, and I recommend to maximize the potential of government-sponsored psychological services such as phone or video therapy to ensure the security of the most vulnerable women in rural locations. They need to expand their safety. Another, to ensure that both the police and public prosecutor have adequate training in criminal investigation of domestic violence against women. All the concerned Union Parishad member and Union Parishad chairman need to come forward. They must collaborate to combat the domestic abuse in rural communities. The victim's privacy must be restricted, and a new code number, maybe it can be implemented. A new code number is required for the law enforcement agency with whom victims may discuss confidential matter also to help ensure that.
I am interrupting you. You have 5 minutes. Can you please conclude within your specified time, please?
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Well, and the last portion is Women Desk is proposed in rural area of Bangladesh, enable the public access the information via internet-based systems. And Bangladesh better mainly the our broadcast media can play a vital role in this regard in these issues, and they need to empower their public voices. So social networking services need to implement, and local government department should set up should set up and be more vocal. Well, and strict controls and inspections need to required and guarantee a natural justice, and women have abuse. Well, and the last one is the protection of women from domestic violence act, but some provisions need to amend also. Well, now it's time for concluding remarks. The mainly domestic violence rate in rural areas is increasing day by day in the months of before COVID-19. And current laws have been applied in such a way that the rate of development is unfathomable. Well, but mainly the main issue is in my concluding part. There's if we ensure the right and protect the women, and I think the act can be more fruitful. And while the Domestic Violence Act of 2010 and the Preventing Oppression Against Women and Children Act of 2000 both include the conflicting and unclear wording, it is unknown whether these two acts will contradict one another, and that's why the victim may find himself or herself in a difficult situation. And in this way, to accomplish these goals, the government might make changes to current laws and regulations and define and describe the legislative body. Thank you.
Thank you, Shobhan, for your nice presentation. I think the subject is more contemporary, and the audience will be benefited by your presentation. And we'll have a question answering session later. So we'll take the question. So now I'm requesting Faria Jahan Antara from University of Dhaka, Department of Law. Her title is The Wealth Epidemic During the Natural Disaster, Upsurge of the Intimate Partner Violence on the Wake of the COVID-19 Pandemic. Fariha.
Thank you so much. Am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you.
You can share your screen.
Yes. It can be visible, right? Can you see the
Yes,
screen?
yes.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for including me in this very time-befitting conference and inviting me, for giving me the floor. So I would like to start, without much further ado, I would like to start my presentation. And I would like to start my presentation with a quotation. So Antonio Guterres said that for many women and girls, the most threatening place of violence is the place where the oasis of safety is supposed to be for them. It is at home. So I make a new call today for peace in homes all around the world. The Secretary General of the United Nations commented on domestic violence following the upsurge of IPV cases amid the ongoing crisis of coronavirus pandemic. This unpredictable crisis has put women's safety in such a dilapidated state that UN Women has announced this crisis as a shadow pandemic. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I would like to quickly introduce myself. My name is Faria Jahan Antara. I am currently enrolled at University of Dhaka pursuing LLB honors. And I was born and brought up in Bangladesh. Now coming back to my research introduction, my paper is titled as The Wealth Epidemic During Natural Disaster, Upsurge of Intimate Partner Violence on the Wake of COVID-19 Pandemic. This paper investigates the mutual relationship of intimate partner violence or IPV and natural disasters. Unsurprisingly, the most widespread form of gender-oriented violence in society is intimate partner violence. Estimates released by World Health Organization says intimate partner violence accounts for the majority of violence against women. Almost 27% of women aged between 15 to 49 who are in a relationship stated that they were physically and or sexually violated by their intimate partner. Moreover, up to 38% of all femicides are committed by intimate partners around the world. Following the natural disasters in recent times, scholars have submitted that IPV escalates during and after any particular disaster. There is no alternative of lockdown and social distancing to curb the virus transmission. Sadly, what has been the safest option to beat this contagious virus has proven to be fatal and deadly to vulnerable women and female victims. So treating this critical issue as if it were a regular day will simply serve to distract us from real-life situation of women's safety during lockdown. I believe my research motivation for this study has been clear. Despite the negative sequel caused by IPV, the research on IPV within the disaster context continues to be understudied. Natural disasters are becoming more frequent and more intense around the world. Studies reporting about different disasters has portrayed a crystal clear image that the increase of intimate partner violence and natural disasters have a string connected with each other. Whether disasters are occurring in developed countries like USA or New Zealand or developing countries like Bangladesh or Haiti or India, whether the form of violence is sexual or physical or mental or any other kind, it is happening and it is being exacerbated day by day. So as the COVID-19 pandemic has restricted the movement of people and imposed them to stay at their home, it has given the opportunity to the perpetrators to opportunity and freedom to the perpetrators for their abusive behavior and cornered victims void of any support or any help. With the unsettling second or third wave of this virus transmission, it can be easily predicted that with not only the cases of virus infection will increase, but the incidence of IPV will also be mounting. Allow me to quickly brief my research methodology. A narrative review, including peer-reviewed and blind research, was conducted on IPV and rise of IPV amid during natural disasters. Keywords were included domestic violence or intimate partner violence and natural disasters. After conducting searches on natural disasters, articles on COVID-19 pandemic were searched following the keywords intimate partner violence and COVID-19. The databases which were undertaken for parallel literature searches are PubMed, International Bibliography for Social Sciences, and Google Scholars database. Papers were omitted if they dealt with other types of family violence. Due to the scarcity of research articles regarding this issue, local and international editorials, commentaries, op-ed pieces, and opinion papers were considered with the idea of obtaining a comprehensive view of IPV in the COVID-19 phase. In usual days, IPV occurrences are so common and widespread that lay people are unable to determine that whether a natural catastrophe actually worsens the situation or it is normal as usual. While people actually acknowledge the rise of IPV owing to lockdown and stay-at-home policies and different news articles, they actually cannot fail to connect see the relationship between natural catastrophes and the proliferation of IPV. Multiple researchers have discovered they pointed out an increase in IPV during distinct disaster occurrences. For a comprehensive and overall scenario of IPV, I would like to mention this following 4 specific disasters: Hurricane Katrina, New Zealand snowstorm, Haiti earthquake, and Indian Ocean or Christmas or Boxing Day tsunami. I will be briefly pointing out the scenario of IPV in the context of these specific disasters. Let's start with Hurricane Katrina. On August 2005, Hurricane Katrina struck and jolted New Orleans and the surrounding areas, massacring over 1,800 people. After these devastating disasters, IPV rates were recorded to be 3 times larger than national or US baseline rates among those relocated. A research study performed on 420 victims following the disasters and displacement reported lifetime IPV increased by 21.9%. In June 2006, on the South Island of New Zealand, snow and heavy rain fell while the North Island was plummeted by property damage and power cuts. Due to that inconvenience, the number of reported cases decreased as the snowstorm approached. When communications were restored following the snowstorm in July, the number of new clients increased, nearly doubling the monthly average. With the passage of time and the reinstatement of communication, the situation was reversed and the number of reported IPV was heightened. Haiti earthquake. The 2010 earthquake has caused massive environmental devastation as well as social and economic turmoil on the poverty-stricken country in Haiti. According to a survey, 71.2% of 148 women reported being physically, sexually, or emotionally assaulted 2 years prior to the earthquake. Abuse has increased by 3.8% in the 2 years since the catastrophe. Shockingly, in the both terms of pre and post earthquake, 80.4% victims were abused by their intimate partner. On December 2004, a tsunami slammed the coast of several South Asian countries, resulting in a massive natural disaster and global crisis. Domestic abuse was deemed to the most widespread and sustained form of post-disaster violence against women in the immediate aftermath of the disaster. There were a spike in the volume of young ladies and girls married soon after the tsunami. Domestic violence, according to the Domestic Violence Act of 2005, includes early and forced marriage. To sum up, it is clear that these four distinct types of natural disasters, their different sets of origin and their emergence on dissimilar premises bears a common connection. Now that I have disclosed and diversely exacerbated scenario of IPV amid natural disasters, I would like to draw your kind attention to the following question. Whether COVID-19 pandemic followed the same course regarding the heightened IPV. From this moment, I will be mentioning a few figures and numbers, so it might get a bit monotonous or distracting, but I will try to be as brief as I can. So I'll try to accurately clear image the scenario of IPV during COVID-19 invasion would be categorized continent-wise. Asia is the first continent to be affected by COVID-19, which arrived via China. I'll take account of three countries, China, India, and Bangladesh, in order to truly comprehend the state of IPV in the context of COVID-19 and the consequences of lockdown. In general, IPV rates of China is substantially higher. Despite this, there were few research articles published as the COVID-19 infection boomed and the state lockdown was imposed. Local and global media retrieved the real scene of this shadow pandemic inside the mainland China. In Hubei province, IPV was reported 3 times higher than the previous year. The number escalated from 47 to 162 during lockdown. According to another source, China witnessed a threefold increase in domestic violence after instituting quarantine. The emergence and conquest of COVID-19 in the densely populated country with a high prevalence of IPV like India made gender-related disparities even more chaotic. In the early April 2020, only a few days after the nationwide lockdown imposed, the number of complaints about violence against women has increased by 100%, according to the National Commission of Women. Analyzing 3 national newspapers, Dainik Jagaran, The Times of India, and The Hindu, in the time frame of March to June, report exposed that the total number of articles about domestic violence published in those time was more than the total number of the domestic violence articles ever published in these 3 months, which demonstrated the gravity of the situation. Bangladesh. Bangladesh has a patriarchal societal framework where social norms justify IPV or intimate partner violence as a private matter. During May 19 and June 18, 2020, interviewing 3,016 mothers, an article indicated that all forms of IPV, including physical, emotional, and sexual violences, were increased after COVID-19 infection revealed itself. 56% reported that increase of physical violence, such as being slapped or having something thrown at them. Traveling from Asia to North America doesn't really change the scenario of violence. In the United States, 1 out of every 3 women has been raped, physically abused, and stalked by an intimate partner at some point of their life. According to an analysis, the number of domestic abuse cases increased by 8.1% after lockdown orders. During March, April, and May of 2020, the pandemic resulted in a 7.5% increase in calls for serving during the first 5 weeks following the widespread social isolation. In Canada, women make up to around 8 out of 10 victims of intimate partner violence, according to police crime figures. Considering the COVID-19 outbreak and stay-at-home imposition, 1 out of 10 women having high or very high level of concern about IPV. Throughout October 1 and December 31, the Assaulted Women's Helpline in Canada received 20,334 calls. In Europe, it seemingly came as a shock when UN Women reported 30% increase of domestic violence since the lockdown in France, and IPV cases and urged for emergency shelter upraised in European countries like United Kingdom and Germany. The actual scope of the problem is still not quantifiable. In the World Health Organization European member states, there has been a 60% surge in the emergency calls from women who have been abused by their intimate partners. In Belgium, since the commencement of the lockdown, the number of the calls to a domestic abuse helpline has tripled, reaching 60 calls per day. In Denmark, National Helpline had detected a 13% upsurge of calls for AIDS comparing to pre-COVID-19 years. Like other continents, surge of IPV did also leave its mark amid COVID-19 on South America as well. Latin America is a place of great success for female movement in appeal for legislation against domestic abuse or IPV. Nevertheless, these actions have not been matched by the equivalent initiatives to minimize the prevalence of IPV problem. In Brazil, after the imposition of lockdown, 22% increment of femicides within 2 months of imposed lockdown. In Colombia, comparing to the same period last year, reports of domestic abuse during lockdown have climbed by 175%. IPV has long been a customary social
I am interrupting you. I'm sorry. Can you please summarize your presentation? Because time is running out.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. So I'll be speaking, skipping the Africa and the Oceania or Australian one, but I would like to mention that the scenario in those places were actually similar as well from the other continents that I have discussed. At this point, I will briefly mention the highlights point of my paper. This paper highlights that exogenous shocks like natural disasters can act as a catalyst for the high prevalence of IPV or domestic violence against women. This also demonstrates the increased rate of IPV persists in the being as long as the disruption triggered by the natural disasters linger. Cases of IPV spike up in countries from least developed to the most developed amid natural disasters, and the COVID-19 pandemic followed the same path as the other disasters. COVID-19 and its lockdown has thrown our life into disarray and livelihood to disruption. Even the coronavirus, which triggered the pandemic, doesn't discriminate to effect between genders clinically. Its consequence in the context of social psychology has been molded by one's gender. This review of the literature highlights that there is a higher risk of domestic violence as a direct consequence of the restriction established by the most of the countries all over the world. During the COVID-19 lockdown 2020, the United Nations estimates that domestic violence incidents will increase by 20% across its 193 member states. Moreover, for every 3 months that the lockdown is extended, the United Nations actually forecasts that 15 million incidents of gender-based violence will occur globally. On my concluding note of this presentation, I would urge the global community to undertake in-depth research attending to socio-economic and cultural aspects of locality. As I mentioned earlier, that natural disasters of any kind are becoming more frequent, addressing this vital issue with severe importance and founding policies and guidelines to help female victims, especially for the moment of any crisis period, has become pressing concern on the national and international level. And I would like to thank honorable panelists and organizers for making me a part of this conference. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Faria, for your outstanding presentation. It is mentioned that with all the participants and with all the panelists, we'll have an extraordinary legend, I say, or extraordinary person. I am going to introduce him, Professor Rabiul Karim. He is from Russia University, from Social Work Department, and he has some extraordinary contribution in the domestic violence against women related field. And he put a question to the presenter. I will put the question in the letter. So welcome, sir, and we are so happy to have you with us. Now, I am going to call Arafat Ibnul Bashar. He is from Department of Law, University of the Chittagong. His presence is evaluating the mass release of the prisoners during the COVID-19 pandemic and the other public health emergencies. Please. Ibnul.
Am I audible?
Yes.
Can you see the screen, ma'am?
No, not yet.
Is it open, ma'am?
No.
Now?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Distinguished panelists, dear guests, fellow participants of the conference, and respected audience, greetings. I'm Arafat Ibn Basha. I'm a student of LLM from the Department of Law, University of Chittagong, and I stand before you, metaphorically of course, to present my paper titled Evaluating the Mass Release of Prisoners during COVID-19 Pandemic and Other Public Health Emergencies. For the convenience of everyone, I would like to draw a brief sketch of my presentation today. I'll be talking about the moral and legal basis of the rights of the prisoners. Then I will move on to the state of prisons during the current pandemic. Then I'll discuss about the early and mass release of prisoners as a policy to curb the COVID-19 transmissions in the prisons. We will talk about the efficacies and the pros and cons of this policy. Then we will talk about the alternative and complementary measures. After that, I'll conclude by stating the condition of the prisons in Bangladesh. Before I start, there is an issue that I would like to address. That is the limitation of my paper. Due to the ongoing second wave of the pandemic, it was not possible to collect data through field visits or through direct inspection of the prisons. That's why my paper will be totally doctrinal in nature, focusing on the secondary sources. Fellow audiences, it has been over a year since we have been living with the pandemic, and we are no closer to ending it, even with the introduction of the vaccines. As prolonged lockdown is no longer a practical approach, governments are trying their best to implement social distancing. But as we have seen that implementing social distancing with or without lockdown has been very difficult. And it is more challenging to implement social distancing in the prisons. Now you may ask, why should we even care about the prisons? Who are these prisoners? The prisoners are the convicted offenders or the alleged criminals. Surely they represent the worst of the humanity, but still they are humans. As of late, they are entitled to a range of human rights. And even before I enter into the argument about the moral or legal aspect of a prisoner's rights, let us not forget that turning a blind eye towards the plight of the prisoners will have grave consequences for the overall containment plans of this pandemic. Although prisoners are kept isolated from the society, a prison is not an isolated establishment. It will not be possible to control the transmission of the virus in a particular community unless measures are taken to control the virus in prisons. And let us not forget that prisons are usually frequented by officials, doctors, and other workers who are also at risk of this virus. Now, let me ask you a question. Why should a prisoner be allowed to have rights in the prisons? In the old times, justice was all about retribution. The punishment of crime was supposed to be as harsh as the crime itself, if not harsher. Capital punishment was handed down like leaflets every day. Convicted criminals were considered as outlaws, outside the protection of law. But gradually, our legal systems and prison systems have evolved. We now no longer believe in retributive justice, although some elements of it is still present in our jurisdiction and a lot of jurisdictions. The Supreme Court of India in Mahadev versus State of Uttar Pradesh held that punishment of an offender is intended to achieve the goals of deterrence, prevention, retribution, and reformation. The prison justice system places great importance on rehabilitating offenders because history has made it very clear. We cannot just violate the rights of people who have violated the right of others. It would not set a good example, and it would not be productive to ensure a law, order, and justice in the society. Now let us look into the journey, how this moral obligation turned into a legal guarantee of rights for the prisoners. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the first global instrument on human rights, ensured protection of all from torture and cruel punishments. And it is more relevant for the prisoners than normal people. This obligation was assured by Article 7 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights and the Convention Against Torture. Further, the Article 10 of ICCPR discusses about the rights of prisoners, namely the right of the prisoners to be treated with humanity and with respect of the inherent dignity of the human person. The provision also talks about segregating the accused from the convicted, the accused juvenile person from adults, and sets out the principle that the treatment of the prisoners shall aim at their reformation and social rehabilitation. Further, Article 12 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights ensures the right of everyone to the highest attainable standard of physical and mental health. And it doesn't differentiate between prisoners and normal free people. Now, all those instruments are broad instruments. If we look into more prisoner-centric instrument, the United Nations Standard Minimum Rules for the Treatment of the Prisoners was the first legal instrument in this subject matter. Initially adopted by the United Nations in 1955 and revised as recently as 2015, it contains detailed provision regarding dignity and respect of the prisoners, non-discrimination, accommodation, healthcare, etc. Besides this, there are a lot of other documents that sets out the right of accommodation, healthcare, religion, and different other rights for the prisoners. And some of these are applicable for the adults and some of these are applicable for the juvenile offenders. A thorough reading of all these documents shows that the prisoners are indeed provided a huge range of rights. The right to liberty is the only right that is completely curtailed by imprisonment. All other rights are available to the prisoners based on their sentence and depending on the jurisdiction they are in. I should also mention that people who are in the prison before the final verdict of their guilt, juvenile offenders and women prisoners are usually guaranteed more rights than the normal prisoners. Now let us take a look into the prisons during this COVID-19 pandemic. All the prisons around the world are overcrowded. It doesn't matter whether it is a prison of a developed nation or a third world country. All of them operate even up to 400 to 600% above its capacity, while the services and necessities are provided according to its official capacity. The lack of proper hygiene, sanitation, understaffing, and negligence towards the healthcare of the prisoners are a very common sight. And during this pandemic, rigid security processes have been delaying the diagnosis and treatment of the diseases in prisons. Prisoners share toilets, dining halls, and sleep in either bunk beds or in the floor, all crammed together. Such conditions make it almost impossible for the implementation of social distancing measures. So many scientists and epidemiologists have even gone on to tag them as epicenters for the spread of virus. The first prisoner infected with COVID-19 was February last year in Iran. To control the transmission, the prison administrations have been sending prisoners to solitary confinement. Dear audiences, let me remind you, solitary confinement is a form of punishment, and the prison administration have been using it for medical and health reasons, not disciplinary issues. That's why prisoners do not even come forward when they feel sick or begin to show symptoms. In a lot of prisons across Argentina, Spain, Canada, prisoners are being isolated for 23 hours every day. And a lot of them have resorted to self-harm and attempted suicide due to deterioration of their mental health. And it is seen that the risk of infection in prisons is 5 times as higher than the normal people, and the rate of death is also higher in the prisons. Since we're seeing that it is the overcrowding that is causing these problems, countries are resorting to de-escalate the overcrowding problem of the prisons. It is estimated that over 700,000 prisoners have been released globally during this pandemic. To curb the continuous flow of prisoners, the courts have also been issuing suspended sentences for crimes that are not serious and giving emergency release to those prisoners who are more at risk of being infected and those who are near at the end of their sentences. The countries usually relies on this following criteria to determine whether prisoners should be released or not. Firstly, the nature of the offense committed, with special emphasis given to those who commit non-violent or minor offenses. Secondly, the nature or status of the sentence, with special emphasis given to those who have served a minimum period in prison or are within days or months of their release. And lastly, whether the prisoner had particular vulnerabilities. Emphasis are given to those who are particularly vulnerable to COVID-19 due to age or chronic health issues, or are pregnant or are breastfeeding prisoners, etc. Pardons, clemency, amnesties, reprieves are all practiced as a measure for reducing prisoners. And all these different measures of releasing the prisoners were implemented through either the orders of a government official, a senior public servant, or usually most commonly through judiciary. Now, from strict penal philosophies, you may say that this prisoner release policy may not be compatible. But when it comes to the release of prisoners under the theory of punishment, we can see that these are actually reformatory in nature. It is actually a statement, a sign of faith by the authority that in these testing times, the system prefers that a prisoner spend your time with your family freely in society rather than being chained in prisons. And thus it can be said that the initiative of reducing the overcrowding in prisons may be the most realistic and feasible way of combating this pandemic. But to think this solution as a silver bullet solution to all the problems of containing the virus in the prison may be a little faulty one. We have seen that in 1997 and in 2001, the Russian prison amnesties were linked to the global reemergence of tuberculosis. Releasing prisoners without taking precautions may lead to accelerated spread of the virus in the community. The release of the prisoners has to take place systematically, scientifically, through proper quarantine and testing, or else it will increase the risk of transmission in the communities where the prisoners are returning. Besides the health risks, early and mass release may also result in law and order problems. Lack of oversight in releasing the prisoners may risk corruption and release of political prisoners. Secondly, the prisoners are criminals actually, who have the habit, the penchant for breaking the law. Releasing such a huge number of lawbreakers in the society prematurely before their reformation is complete may lead to serious deterioration of law and order. And we know that during the pandemic, the law enforcement agencies are burdened with the extra duties of enforcement of quarantine and lockdown. So their capacity to fight crimes is reduced. And in such situations, if the law and order situation deteriorates, it can actually have serious consequences. Again, there is another concern for some of the countries that equitable application of prisoner releasing policies may not be taking place. For example, in USA, the white people are twice more likely to get out of prison early than the black people. But actually, it is the black people who are the majority population in the prisons. Now, if we talk about some alternative or complementary measures, aside from these prisoner release policies, we can talk about the non-custodial measures. And it has proven to be a good alternative even in normal times. But as we have seen that not all countries have welcomed the non-traditional methods of sentencing. The ongoing pandemic might be a good opportunity to do so, and it is expected to be a great result even after the pandemic has subsided. But it should also be kept in mind that lenient sentences are not given to those who do not deserve it. Since public health emergency, a pandemic does not limit the right of the victims of a crime to justice. Moreover, in order for prisoner releasing policies to work properly, the prisons must be provided with the minimum level of safety during the public health emergencies. Introducing universal testing and contact tracing in prisons might be short-term strategies, but it will be instrumental in the effectiveness of long-term measures like prisoner release policies. Again, prisoner releases that includes conditions such as condition to behave good or compliance with COVID-19 directions such as quarantine and testing, home detention are more likely to be effective. Conditional releases are effective because it gives a precaution to the prisoners that your freedom is not unconditional and If you do not comply by it, it will be revoked. You will be again called back to the prisons. And lastly, I have also seen that in India, the prisons have resorted to some creative methods, such as shifting the prisoners to temporary prisons in case of an outbreak, preparing separate block-wise timetable so that there is a prevention of overcrowding during meal services and other times. So this could be implemented also side by side with the prisoner release policies. Now let us look into the condition of Bangladesh, the prisons of Bangladesh.
Arafat, I'm so sorry. Sorry for interrupting you. Time is running out. You have 5 minutes to complete your presentation, please.
Thank you, ma'am. So in Bangladesh, there are 68 prisons and they house about 90,000 inmates, which is actually twice the original capacity of the prisons. Our prison saw its first infection back in April. And at the same time, the judiciary took initiative to release some of the prisoners. Around 21,000 adults were released in a matter of 10 days from pretrial detention, and 343 children were released from custody in a matter of 7 working days. This initiative of Bangladeshi judiciary to emphasize more in pretrial detainees and children is actually a praiseworthy step. But I have not been able to confirm whether these released inmates have maintained any source of quarantine before or after the release. Besides, the prison administration has also done a praiseworthy job in containing the spread of the virus. They have introduced mandatory mask wearing, 14-day quarantine for incoming inmates, setting up isolation and quarantine wards, and not allowing prisoners to meet with their families, but allowing them to talk on phones weekly, then access to hand sanitizers are some of these measures. And it has been done through the cooperation of ICRC and US Embassy. However, in June last year, High Court Division refused to pass an order on a writ petition that sought directives on the government to protect prisoners in jails. According to the bench, since the situation was under control in the prisons, there was no need to interfere. But I think the High Court could have been more vigilant in this matter. So comparing the official number and the rate of infection in the country, we can say that the COVID-19 in the prisons are under control and the administration has done a good job. But still, I would say that this is not a decisive conclusion because the official count is not reliable. But still, depending on the data, I can say that the success of Bangladeshi prisons is actually depending due to the avoiding over-reliance on this prisoner release and more on building the capacity to fight this outbreak. Now, dear audiences, I'm not against this prisoner release policy. There is nothing inherently evil with the idea of releasing prisoners to contain the spread of the virus. But if we consider it as an ideal solution, it might be a faulty one. The entire containment plans must rely on both the prisoners, release of the prisoners, and building the capacity of the prisons to fight the virus. And response to any future public health emergency must integrate the considerations of the prisons without any fail. Since the vaccination program has started, we expect that the prisoners, along with the prison staff, will be included in a preferential basis for the vaccines. And I would like to conclude my presentation with a quotation of Fyodor Dostoevsky. It says that the degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. So as we fight this terrible pandemic, let us not forget about these prisoners. Thank you. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Arafat. Now, I would like to call Mr. Vijay Prasad Jarshal, lecturer, Department of Science and Law, Kathmandu University, School of Law. Please, I'm requesting you to say something about the papers.
Yes, can you hear me? Yes, thank you so much for inviting me to be one of the panelists in this international conference. And I'm thankful to everyone from this Pacific University, as well as persons who refer me to be a panelist in the conference. In fact, when we see the 3 papers, out of 4 papers, 3 are very similar, and somewhere it gives a pictures where the pandemic do have a very special impacts on like women or like intimate partners or like the prisoners, that we required a very special consideration that is required at the time of crisis. So all 4 papers do deserve a very congratulations, and they have conducted like empirical research as well as theoreticals, and theoretical is above the standards, in fact, like bringing different literatures based on ideas, specifically trying to connect with the pandemic with the other perspectives too. So these are some of my observations on 4 different papers. These are not the comments, because we're not going to comment. These are only the observations that I understood by listening your papers, by reading abstracts, and based on my own research parts. So the first paper is really fantastic in the sense that we're trying to say whether a law is really sufficient enough to address pictures of domestic violence in pandemic or not. So it's not only about the inequality in the executions. So when they try to give a picture saying that even the laws which are not proper in order to address the problem that we are saying, that's very common either in the post-pandemic or pre-pandemic or during pandemic, the domestic violence is not going to be over. But if you see the modus of domestic violence and the pandemic as a cause for it is a bit shifted. So the first thing that you have to remember, whether there is a substantive law that had created an inequality in order to address the domestic violence issues or any others relating to the domestic violence. For example, when we talk about the domestic violence, intimate partners violence or gender-based violence or any other forms of violence where women are being always in a centers, we must not forget they have to pass through different intersections. For example, if a woman she's living in the rural part of the Bangladesh or rural part of the Nepal or rural part of any country of South Asia, and if she is being abused by her intimate partners, then ultimately the burden that she had to suffer is much more higher than by the foreigners. So from that perspective, we have to always see the possibilities of intersections between these all categories. So the first, we have to remember whether there is a really law creating an inequality or the like discriminations, or there is a problem that in terms of executions of those laws. Second, we have to always remember this is about the institutions. For example, when we say domestic violence, we have to always remember whether the law enforcement officials are in positions to take it is in a positive way. When we make a complaint, do we have to suffer furthermore? So we cannot forget the secondary victimizations concern that we had in like afternoon sessions. So whether our law enforcement officials are there to facilitate the process once the reports have been lodged to the concerned agencies. And third, we have to remember it is not only about putting the perpetrators or the offenders behind the bar, but we have to always remember whether there is an adequate financial budget separated by the respective ministry or not. For example, I can give you an example in case of Nepal. Nepal government has established a victim relief fund as per the Victim Compensation Act. So if perpetrators are unable to provide certain financial assistance to the victims, it is the responsibility of the government to separate certain portions of the budget that will be distributed to the victim. So it is not only like putting someone behind the bar. We have to also consider the conditions of the victim at the particular context. And during pandemic, we require more than in the normal situations. Another, we have to always remember whether there is a departmental coordinations between the different agencies. For example, I don't know about the Bangladesh, but if you see in context to Nepal, we have a National Women Commissions where these things have been reported. We have a government prosecutor office. We have like different NGOs, INGOs working in the field. So if these all NGOs, INGOs, institutions are working together, is there any common platforms where these problems will be addressed? So the first papers in terms of like whether there is a statutory provisions regarding to create an inequality in terms of violence against women or not. So this may be the further perspective that if you want to improvise your papers, you can look into these all perspectives, not only in terms of enforcement, but in terms of law, like enactments or the promulgations of legislative too. Another, you have to rightly said, the first presenter rightly said, whether we have seen different factors during a pandemic or not. Was there not previous a cultural factor that has supported pre-pandemic issues of domestic violence? Those were the very common factors that we have seen in the literature, that we have seen reported in medias and everywhere. So from that perspective, whether there is a specific correlations or the same factors were in a rise during the pandemic. So whether there's a positive correlations or the negative correlations in regards to the rise of violence in the pandemic can be also a better, like another grounds where you can work on it furthermore. And also, if you see the like domestic violence during the pandemic, whether that does that come with the new characters, with the new features. Even I have seen, I read a few papers in reported online portals. Even when the partners or even the victims, let's we call victims, who were reporting to the police law agencies due to certain constraints or movements and everything, they were not in positions to provide a proper address. And this scenario is everywhere. So how can, during a pandemic, or how can, if we think for this pandemic, what would be the better ways how to create a very inter-ministerial coordinations committee that would be there to address these all concerns. And regarding the access to justice to the first papers, we have to always remember whether our justice administration system is very costly or is affordable to the victims or not. There are few cases where the victims, when in case of report to the police personnel, they want to be favored, and they have a responsibility to bring all the possible evidences to bring a claim. And considering the hierarchy that we live in our society, considering the different factors, those are the reality, and that cannot be overturned. So from that perspective, also, access to justice is not only about whether you have a capacity to lodge a complaint or not. Whether you are sure about to get a proper justice by the justice administrations or by the judiciary or by any proper mechanisms or not is also concerns to the access to justice. So these are the three perspectives that I remember on the first papers. And if you find something that will support you, like revise your papers, you can work on it. But your paper was very excellent. Regarding the second paper we had, in terms of like IPV, in fact, issue of like interpersonal intimate partner violence, that's similar that we are also facing in Nepal. As we know, the very common cited and often cited reasons for the rise of intimate partner violence is not only during crisis, but even in a normal time. The only problem is that once you go the report, you have to also think what is the next after the report essence. After lodging a complaint against your partners to the concerned agencies, what is the next? So until and unless a victim would be free or would be assured by the government agencies after scenario, this problem will be never ever addressed. So, and even during the crisis, there is always possibility to have a rise of these all similar problems. So they try to give very comprehensive pictures, not only in like developing country, but even in a developed country, we have seen a scenario in a very similar way. So it is not only the law, how far is developed, it is also the mentality, that's what we perceive. And it is also the hierarchical power structures. And also some other factors, for example, religions, culture, customs, even the legal institutions do play for these all factors to have very specific concerns during the pandemic. And third papers was about relevant, is about like, in fact, is where about the child marriage and rural parts, domestic violence in the rural parts of the Bangladesh. I had a chance to be in Bangladesh in more than 3 times. So I had a time to visit the different parts, like rural parts of the Bangladesh. And I have also seen the good parts of those rural villages. So from that perspective, some things that the scenarios of like non-deportations of those cases in the rural part is much more higher, and that we have also seen very similar in Nepal. Still, some persons or some percentage of people, even they are facing regular violence, either in any forms, be it the domestic violence of lower degree or domestic violence of the higher degree that leads to death. In those all scenarios, also the deportations and even the concerns of the law enforcement officials are being not seen very adequate and very supporting the victims. So it is not only a law and legal institution, it is also how do we interact with these other factors in terms of giving an equal space to the different genders, or giving an equal acknowledging the equal contributions to the different people of the society. So it is always when we say violence or be it in any forms, we have to always remember whether there is a that we call a structural violence in fact. So domestic violence can comes in a very way when we have very created structures in terms of be it powers, in terms of be it access to resources, be it in terms of taking a decision, giving opportunity to participate in decision-making process or to have a chance to represent anywhere at any municipal councils. So these are the things that you have to always remember. Last is very interesting paper, and that's very similar to us also. Even we had conducted a very small survey whether the prisoners overcrowded and how the pandemic things are being really impacting on the prisoners of Nepal. And we found a very similar scenarios as last presenter said about the Bangladesh. But there is a necessity. I do agree with all the recommendations, and I do also agree with all the concerns put forward by the 4 presenters. But when we try to provide recommendations, you have to at least try to put forward that the previous plans, policies, program of actions, strategy actions were proven ineffective. Only then the recommendations forwarded would be much more reliable and admissible. Law, for example, I saw one recommendation, very common recommendation, there should be executions of law and policies. It is not something new, right? What is the percentage of Child Restraint Act was been implemented in the Bangladesh? What is the percentage of Domestic Violence Act were implemented by the law enforcement officials or by the government agencies? So you have, when we try to provide the recommendations, I also do in my papers, we have to be very specific, and have to also try to analyze and try to draw analogy from a perspective of saying that these things were not previously done. Hence, you required to give more attention to these perspectives. So this is all from my side. I hope try to give a very overall comments on not the comments, but the observations that I understood by reading your abstract, by listening you. Thank you so much, and thank you so much, University of Asia Pacific, for being me here. Thank you so much. And best of luck for you for the paper. Yes.
Thank you so much, Mr. Vijay Prasad Joshal, for your valuable speech and recommendation. I hope your suggestion will help the presenter to improve their paper. So now I'm going to call Dr. Parveen Islam, Professor, Faculty of Law, University of Dhaka. Ma'am, can you please say something about the paper?
Actually, I would like to thank the University of Asia Pacific for having me as a panelist today. Can everybody hear me? I think you can.
Jiman.
Okay. Actually, I missed a little bit of the first speaker, but I have heard a little bit, but for the other 3 I heard. I have to say, first of all, that I'm very impressed by all of them. They have chosen topics which are, I would say, very relevant, very challenging. And at this point, we have crossed more than a year in this very unprecedented situation. And all over the world, we're facing the same situation. But the topics that they have chosen are very different from one another, and the approach they have made to each of the studies are also very different. That I liked, and I would like to thank them also for taking this, very interesting. I would say the whole session has, I found it to be very interesting. I would just like to add a few things. I think the three speakers were Shahriar, Faria, and Arafat, right? So from Shahriar Shobhan's study, which he has done on, I think it's on domestic violence. Yes, it's on domestic violence during COVID case, and with in reference to rural women. What is very interesting here is that he chose rural areas to study, which is, in terms of access, it is not a very easy thing to do. I have to, basically, I want to thank him personally for going to this extent. And he has actually collected primary data, and which is also very not easy. And with respect to primary data, I have to say that having access is one thing, but then being able to question women directly, put them, making the questionnaire and then having to interview them isn't a very easy task. I'm very happy with the way he has proceeded with his work. All of them are good. I'm just, mentioning the little parts that I personally like, and I think they're very good. One thing I would have liked to know, if possible, if he could answer this question for me, is that when he was trying to access the women, and the women that I think he interviewed about 15 women. He said,
Shobhan, are you listening to ma'am?
Can you ma'am please repeat it again, ma'am?
Yes, you said you interviewed 15 women.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So when you were interviewing them, apart from the help that you got from at the union level to access them, I mean, how did you actually approach them? Can you please explain? I mean, how did you select the home and how did you access them?
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, ma'am, due to time constraints, I collected data in a random way. And when I selected my topic and working on it, I was staying in my hometown. My hometown is Virtural, and I was starting my journey with by taking help from our sub-inspector, and I really thankful to my sub-inspector. He helped me a lot, and I just made some questionnaire here, ma'am, and selected some more than 6 questions actually, which was relevant to incorporating in my research paper. And the question was, ma'am, is there have any knowledge about domestic violence related legislation or not? And is it true that they are sexually assaulted or physically assaulted or not? Did they lost their job, family lost their jobs during COVID-19 situations or not? And when they physically assaulted, did they make file complaint nearest police department or police stations or not? So, ma'am, I made a team, and my university's junior, they covered in Rangpur district, and I mainly covered in Borishal district, and my seniors also helped me a lot, and he covered Bagherhat district. So in that cases, and based on these questions, I just covered this scenario, ma'am.
Yes, it was an excellent attempt, no doubt. I just want to ask you one thing. Did you have girls in your team? I mean, were you questioning them directly, or were there a few girls involved in your team?
Thank you, ma'am. Thanks for your question, ma'am. Actually, when I presenting my paper, I recommend the things that privacy should be protected. That was my first recommendation, ma'am. So when I made a team, ma'am, and when as a boy or as a man, I didn't allow all the questions and cannot answering in a good way. So I made my team combinedly both male and female. So when I approaching in their families, then I take help from our union parishad members and chairmen and my mother also, and my mother, my auntie, and also they helped me a lot for doing this research, ma'am.
That is wonderful. I mean, you got the whole family involved.
They just delivered the questions.
Wonderful, yeah. And your findings and everything, you know, I could guess that it was pretty thorough. And this was one thing, but just for your, you know, just think about it. I'm sharing you an idea, is that when you take people like superintendent, I mean, police from the police or administration, they are power structures. I mean, you have to understand that people who you approach, normal people would feel, sometimes they may not feel very comfortable in the presence of people who are within the social hierarchy. They're higher up. See, they're much more powerful than the normal person. So that is all. I mean, this is just a suggestion which I think you should take into account when you do future research like this. But otherwise, I find that you have done an excellent job. Thank you very much, Faria. Okay. And now I would like to ask Faria. Faria, are you here?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you.
Okay. Faria, your work is also, I have to say, it's wonderful. You have, you know, covered almost all the issues that I was expecting. And yes, intimate partner violence is a very big issue nowadays. Nowadays, it was always there, but it's being highlighted now more often. Okay. What would you say? I mean, what would you say is your overall, your work is on secondary data, most of it, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. No, that's okay. I mean, it's a different sort of a study, but have you made any, towards the end, I couldn't really basically make out whether you made some suggestions on it, or have you tried to look into any of the initiatives that the Bangladesh government is taking to resolve the crisis? Have you addressed that?
Yes, ma'am. Actually, I haven't presented in my presentation here, but at my research paper, I have mentioned that the government actually started that 333 call for, especially for women and women's safety. But actually, I haven't mentioned here because I wanted to provide a global perspective and global scene of IPV in this COVID-19, not the initiatives by other government or international organizations, but the real scenario of IPV currently going on.
Yes, I understand that. And it was an excellent one, a very good presentation indeed. So thank you, Faria. And now to Arafat. I think he's from Chittagong University. Arafat, are you here?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. This is a favorite topic. I can't tell you how interesting I find it, because nobody dares to approach issues which involve prisoners. And your work, the one that you presented here, it gives us enough information, relevant information regarding this. It could have been, I don't know how many studies actually there are. Even regarding prisoners, I think there aren't a lot, because people are generally, researchers are, they have difficulty finding access, they have difficulty in addressing any issues relating to prisoners. But for future, I would suggest you can look into this a little bit more, because these are areas which are, I would say, relatively still pristine and untouched, and people don't normally try to address these issues relating to prisoners. It's a very important field. And if you are ever able to take this up into a more, extensive, I would have to, I would like to suggest that you do, if possible, and try to get primary data if possible. Another thing that you mentioned towards the end of your presentation is that you talk about the release of prisoners, and then you talk about the building capacity thing, this two together. And of course, all this is in context of COVID. But again, like the previous panelist mentioned, that we must understand that, yes, any crisis, whether it's environmental, whether it's something else, it tends to accent, it tends to push people to the limit in every way, and all the things that which are basically, I would say, not so nice about our life, they tend to get increased. They tend to build up in some way or the other. In case of prisoners, the situation of Bangladesh, like you mentioned, it's they are the jails are pushed to the limit, in the sense that there are so many inmates, and there is basically very little scope of social distancing. You do mention that some have been released. Is there any further information about, apart from that 21,000 that you mentioned that were released, were you able to find out if there were more after that, further releases after that?
Thank you, ma'am. Actually, that initiative was taken by Justice Iman Ali, and after that, there has been no initiative about mass releases. Yes, there are releases going on, and as far as I'm reading in the newspapers, the courts are more lenient towards bails and releasing the prisoners on bails. But there have been no mass scale release of the prisoners as of after that event. And one thing that I would like to actually, I think, is more relatable in this matter. I have actually tried to gather some primary source information. I talked to one of official of the jail, but when he heard that this information might get published or might come in front of any people, he refused to answer. He said that no, I would not say anything. His official statement was "Amar chakri niye tanatani pore jete pare," something like that. So I could not gather any information on that matter.
That's fine. You should always try to assure them that this information will not, it will be protected. Anyway, these are the difficulties of collecting primary data. But again, as to release, I would say your suggestion is in a way, I appreciate that yes, it cannot be done at a massive scale. It cannot be, because after all, they are behind bars for a reason, and those things need to be verified. And then, of course, the building capacity, building accommodation, all these things. I don't know whether there is any information regarding. You say that yes, there were initiatives taken, even help from the U.S. Embassy with regard to social distancing and mask, providing masks and hand sanitizers and all that. So that's a good picture for now. I am happy with your work, and inshallah you will take up this topic again and do it more extensively when you can. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, ma'am, for your kind words. I think the presenter will be happy to have your comments. So now, question and answer session. Can you please ask any question directly to the presenters?
Are you addressing me?
No, sir. No, ma'am. It's for all.
I would like to thank everyone again.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Okay. So anyone can put question directly to the presenter.
Right. Thank you. If I may, ma'am. Thank you very much. So I would like to congratulate every presenter for their very timely, presentation, particularly relating to pandemic. So I have few, rather few observation in general as well as some specific observation as well. So coming up to the first presentation, Pratasha, I have two observations regarding your paper. Number one, I understand that due to the pandemic situation, it's not easy to collect primary data. However, with the development of information technology, and we are getting used to it, online platforms, I think we need to find out alternative ways to collect the primary data. I mean, by going to field research, it doesn't mean that we have to go to field because the situation has been difficult. So I would suggest that in order to make this sort of the research that talks about the barriers and challenges, I think that to make it more credible and more acceptable and more in terms of more interesting, if you can add few case studies, that would be very helpful instead of relying on the secondary reports, because those reports are actually available. So sometimes these papers are considered as a sort of a conduit to describing some of the reports already there. So in order to make sure, because the reason for this conference is to develop a publishable paper. So I think it would be better that to have those case studies that could actually add some novelty to your paper that might, will sort of, in my opinion, will raise more interest in terms of publication. Second thing, I'll be sort of echoing my colleague Vijay Prasad Jaswal about the recommendations, and I think it's in general for all the presenter. When we're talking about recommendations, I think we have sort of a tendency to say the general stuff. We need to apply the law, we need to improve the law, we need to sort of apply the policy. So this is very helpful for the people who are actually towards whom we are actually making the recommendation, because when things are vague, it's easy to sort of maneuver through not doing anything at all, because at the end of the day, the question would be that what to do. I mean, we're doing all the things we can do, so what else they want? So I think when we're making a recommendations, and especially since we understand the problem, I think it's better to sort of have a clear idea about what we are actually recommending. And I think Jaswal actually made a very interesting point about that, try to find out what actually implemented, what recommendation was there on the scene, and then sort of going from there to put out sort of direction that what actually needs to be done, so that the policymaker will not be able to overlook the problem, and at least we'll be able to say that there is a clear picture there, and you haven't applied that. So in that way, the maneuvering will be less possible. So that's my comments on Pratasha Ahmed's paper, and as well as the one those are making those general recommendations. About Shahriyar's paper, that's a very excellent job. I mean, within this pandemic to collect empirical data. But I think when you are using that, I think it's one of the sellable point is to talk about the the empirical part more in the paper, rather than you're talking about all those gaps in the law. Because again, these are a theoretical discussion, and that all can be discussed in the paper. So since we are collecting sort of a feedback from our panelists, I think it's a very good opportunity to try to show that what you have done in your empirical research, rather than explaining what are the gaps in the law. So I think one of the things that you could do, I'm sure that you have done in your paper, about talking about the sample size to make it more credible about how many people you have interviewed, and then talk more about what you have found from the field. So I think this is something I think for future presentation, when you'll be using a qualitative research methodology, you need to talk more about that rather than the theoretical part. So I think this is something need to be done. And second thing that I have sort of a question that when you're talking about a rural women's domestic violence, that's a very interesting point you're making, because most of the studies are mostly directed towards the urban domestic violence. So I'm just interested to know if, since I haven't read your paper entirely, so what differences actually are in terms of the domestic violence in rural area and the urban area. I think this is something can be a very important sellable point for publication, because we can show that, in rural area, there are different barriers. There are some point you did mention, but I think this is something you need to focus more on, that these are the special issues that rural women face in terms of domestic violence. Because I think talking about that it has increased, it's the general information that's available, but we need to know what extra happening in the rural area that's making them more vulnerable than the urban areas domestic violence. I think this is something you can look into in your paper. And of course, Parmin ma'am already addresses various issues about the broad approach that you have taken. I think it's okay for this paper, but I think it's better to sort of narrow down your scope. So if you actually want to publish this paper, because when you will be publishing, they will be asking for specific findings, and when you are approaching more, though it's very interesting to know about them, but they will consider as a more like a descriptive rather than focused discussion. Okay, so I think that would something you need to adopt because it's a very interesting paper, especially slightly different than the other two paper about general domestic violence and intimate partner violence. So that's something I have for you. Let me be very brief about Arafat's presentation. It's a very interesting presentation, paper that you have talked about. I think we talk about the empirical data, and there are the challenges, and you already mentioned that they are not interested to give you the information. But I think one thing is more important. This is the most important thing, I think, to collect those data. So, I mean, in order to make it very compelling, paper for international publication, I think if you can actually look for the ways, maybe through the concerned ministry and others, to collect those data, I think this will make this a very, I would say very important findings for people who actually are often ignored. So I think you can look into that, because when you are relying on the secondary data, the publisher often find it less compelling. So this is a very interesting question. I think you should further explore that when you will be actually finalizing your paper. And small observation, Arafat, about the presentation. I think it's an excellent presentation. The way you have explained, you have understand. But one thing I think you should keep in mind in future, and I'm saying it because this is a sort of youngsters conference. So one thing I think we have to differentiate, that when we're presenting a paper, I think the approach should be to sort of justify or establish the thesis that you're trying to establish, right? I think so. The focus should be on this is the two things that I want to I have discussed in my paper, and I have discussed in this way. So this is one way of approaching when you're presenting a paper. Against you're discussing something, giving a talk about a particular topic. So talk is more focused on stating the situation, and paper presentation should be more focused on what I'm trying to establish. So I have a thesis, I have an argument that I'm trying to establish. So I think everything is there, but if you have approached that in that particular direction, that I think you get better, understanding. So thank you very much. I have taken too much time. So I found it so interesting. So I have taken a lot of time. So thank you very much, and congratulations to everyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reza, for your comments. I just want to convey one question on behalf of the Rabiul Karim sir. As I said before, Rabiul Karim sir was with us, but he's not feeling well and he left. But he kept one question for Shobhan. I'm just asking the question on behalf of him. He said, is there any scientific evidence that the rate of the domestic violence women in increasing day by day in rural Bangladesh? Shobhan.
Thank you, sir. Actually, ma'am, due to time constraints, I already mentioned I collected data random way, and it was so difficult to collect all the data and gathering all my data in a scientific way. But I tried a lot and attempt to contact in a different way and try to cover 4 districts and 17 villages, and in order to conduct interviews and in order to get some crucial responses. But according to my primary data, which I have collected, and around 53% women are physically tortured, and they just and they individually they told that, and they mentioned that the rate was individually they mentioned that the ratio was 53% women are physically tortured and around 12% are mentally assaulted. And this rate was increased then from May 2020 when actually the in Bangladesh lockdown started. So, but in some way, ma'am, in other for me, yes, ma'am, the proportion of individuals who were tortured increased 31% over the month before. So actually, when I collected all the data and I got some ratio, and it was established that the rate is increasing day by day. It's true, but for time constraints, I could not do that in a scientific way.
Okay, thank you so much, Shobon. In that case, I would like to suggest you on behalf of the SAR that your paper will be valuable if you apply some scientific method to collect the data, and you will have to increase your sample size. So thank you. At this point, I would like to conclude this session, and I would also like to thank you all to be here. And again, I want to say that we have at this session, our honorable departmental head of the department was there, and also Professor Asasul Jamal sir was with us, and my colleagues, dear participants, and also the panelists. Thanks again to be with us. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Thank you also.
Thank you all. Thank you, madam.
Thank you so much, sir.
Sir, can we take leave from here, sir? Sir, can we take leave from here, sir?
Yes, we can leave now, isn't it?
Okay, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.